into it. I can only imagine how many hours every day was, and minute by minute thinking it through. And I just feel like we all owe you like so much gratitude for making it all happen. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Jeff. I will not take all the credit, even though I wish I could. But yes, the whole ABA team was amazing. We will be sending out a survey for Winter Institute, so you can submit some more specific feedback that way. That would be really helpful for us, kind of going ahead and kind of seeing what worked and what we might be able to improve upon. But just thank you so much for everyone being there, for participating. You all made it what it was, and even better than we had hoped it could be. So thank you all. And if there's any questions that you have for me or ABA, I can certainly bring it back to the team and specific feedback. So I'm happy to do that for you.
Yeah, I thought overall the show was fantastic, and I was talking to Tim a little bit before we started today about just being able to capture a little bit of the magic of the in-between sessions seemed to pop up in the chat and the breakout rooms, which was great. And going into it with kind of a one line of education and events where everybody was attending the same thing. I wasn't sure how I felt about that at first, but I really kind of loved it. It was like everybody was doing the same thing at the same time. It was easy to jump in and out. And it felt like you were going to something and attending, a special event. So I thought that was great. Do we want us to jump into maybe specifics and dig in a little bit into some of the tracks and takeaways from those? I have a couple things I want to say, but I'll let everybody kick it off if that's cool. Harriet in the chat, technology was impressive and smooth. The program's excellent, but I still feel profound disconnect in this format. Congrats on keeping the event alive, though. Very grateful for that. Definitely.
I think if I had only one disappointment, it was that we each only got one rep pick breakout. I really missed that part of it. And maybe I don't think anybody got more than one, but I just kind of missed. And then mine went way short. And so I just felt like that could have been something that could be improved on in the future.
Hey, Alana, I can jump in about the rep picks. So the rep picks were assigned based on the selections that you made during the registration. So where there were 3 sessions that you could choose from. You could choose any combination. You could choose just one, you could choose 2, or you could choose all. So we just assigned the rep picks based on whatever you chose during the registration. So maybe that wasn't super clear during the registration period. So we can maybe make that a little more obvious that those are the ones that are going to be available.
Yeah, I did kind of hear a lot of chatter around that where I wasn't the only one who ended up with one, and it just, it wasn't super clear because it's so new, right? Like it's bound to happen. But since I unfortunately apparently only signed up for one, I only got one and felt like I missed a lot. And then I don't know if there's a way that if those were recorded and that we can watch them after the fact, or like I felt like there were so many opportunities to jump in and out of other things. It would have been cool if we could have jumped into another one, like when ours ran short or something.
Yep, the rep picks are going to be available on BookWeb. We're working on getting them up this week. Pretty much most of those sessions are going to be posted on BookWeb too. And just a reminder that the Brene Brown is only available for a few weeks. So you'll just want to give that another watch if you want to before, I don't remember the date that it's coming down from BookWeb, but it's at the end of
Hey, can I ask just a really quick logistical question about rep picks? So you had them all pre-recorded. Can you talk a little bit to the thought process behind that? Would it have been just too hard to coordinate multiple like live sessions with time limits and such?
Yes, the short
Okay.
answer to that is
Okay,
yes.
that's what I thought. I didn't know if there was something else maybe behind that. Okay.
And the idea was too that you know, the publisher reps were in the rooms with you, so they were in the chat. Hopefully, they were engaging with you if you had questions. So the idea being, you know, we could get all of the videos organized and the timing correct. If we did do it live, I don't know that we would be able to manage the timing for everyone. But yeah, we wanted to have the publisher reps in there so they could still interact with you while the presentation was going on.
Well, and I think, yeah, Lauren, also what we were told as publishers was that there was a real attention to having the ASL interpreters. And so that was a big component that they couldn't logistically do all of the reps if we were live. So I think, Larry, that was a issue as well.
Okay.
That was my understanding. But
yeah, Larry, as somebody who has advocated live presentations, I really liked it as the I hadn't even realized, Lauren, that reps were live. I'm glad to know that because I kind of sensed it and I think I saw some responding. But as a viewer and as a planner of these kinds of programs, it made me realize, oh, this helps make sure it's going to happen, right? If we had 6 different people trying to log in and share their screens with different connections or volumes or possible tech issues at the outset, that really, even so, there were discrepancies between volumes and patterns, right? And I think a few of my booksellers experienced that maybe more than I did. But it would have been worse if it was live. It would have been more challenging if it was live. So I appreciated like seeing it in action in order to sort of evaluate it more specifically, and also knowing that that the reps actually were there. And now I realize the magic of what Vivian did, right? I was like, holy cow, Sandra's so brave. I could never do that. Anyway, I thought it was great. It was much better than I expected. A recorded sort of patchwork of reps to be, and it's something I'd like to see possibly endure in programming, even when we are post-pandemic, or for the publishers to consider. I don't want to talk too much, but I see Nina here, and I'm realizing like the one tragedy, not tragedy, but sort of desire I had at the very end on a very substantive issue that was being presented in a distant way, where a lot of booksellers had very specific questions about specific scenarios around labor laws and protections and advocating for our employees and making sure we're working within the law. We are not corporations that have the capacity to hire HR professionals, as was suggested by the presenter. There were several ways in which the presenter perhaps just didn't understand where many of us are coming from. And there was a real dire need for booksellers to connect to booksellers and talk through scenarios and to share knowledge and to really apply what we could understand about the COVID laws to very real and specific circumstances that we encounter in management now, and how to navigate that. So I realized like the chat wasn't, I was trying to respond when I noticed how many people were interested in Nina's question, and then it was like we were gone, right? We didn't have a way to reconnect with each other, or the speaker, who also may or may not have had the time or the capacity to answer some of our specific questions. So like a debrief of peer-to-peer, which is sometimes what we've done maybe in certain settings. A debrief, I remember we did it on the diversity topic. We did a like breakout workshops after a big topic, after Roxanne Gay spoke to all of us. we investigated further and took a much closer look at the application of a big topic and brought it back in. So I really would love that. I actually would love an opportunity to connect around the evolving COVID labor laws with other bookstore owners and managers. And I think for those of us who are planning meetings or spring forums, we should think about the need to sort of debrief or step into peer-to-peer conversations after hearing from an expert. And that, I think all the keynotes probably could have benefited from that. I know we had, time restrictions, but those kinds of things are super interesting to me to investigate for spring forum. Like, how can we take what we did and really talk like practical applications peer-to-peer?
Yeah, so I want to second that. I'm glad to see you too, Joanna. Yeah, that was a pretty scary seminar in a lot of ways. Are we hearing a roar from somewhere? Okay. Yeah, I felt pretty terrified after that one because I just felt like there was a lot of liability, blah, 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 and not a lot of like solutions that speak to my level of running a business. But I agree with Joanna. I do feel like if after each one of those workshops we'd gone into breakout rooms, there would have been a lot of productive conversation from that. So that's a good idea for future structure. And also I remember like a lot of times watching the chat that like other threads would come up, like we need cafe budgets, we need ordering budgets, we need like different workshops on all of these topics. So I hope that ABA, it sounded like somebody was sort of tracking that and there would be follow-up for that, but maybe we can also do some of that on the regional level and, just have more sort of topical focused meetings.
Maybe we could explore as a region working with the ABA to make those recordings available to us, and then we could hold sessions for our members. Like we could have it watch it together and then come back and talk as a regional group, because then it would be not such a huge conversation. Or maybe we could make it available to watch and then have a time to come together, like on our bookseller chat or something, that we could have discussions surrounding those topics, because there were a lot to dig into.
Yeah, and she kept on the labor law, she kept saying, here's the federal law, but your state may have a different law. And so then it started to feel like, well, maybe we should have us, maybe we should get all the Illinois people together and figure out what the Illinois law is,
Mm-hmm. So Larry, maybe we could as a board explore that opportunity.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And I think these bookseller chats might offer that. It's good,
Yeah.
Good session topics for sure. All right, who wants to jump in now? Joanna, were you about to jump in?
I loved the booths. I got a lot out of. I know it was a disorienting experience, and thank you, publishers who were live. I know that that would have felt strange to me, like to sit there and sort of wait for people. Most of them did a great job in sort of recognizing when people entered, inviting them onto the screen if they wanted to be, providing ongoing visual presentations, which was like, for me, when I hopped into Booklog, I saw that he was sharing a screen with my POS system, and I was like, oh, this is neat. Like he's, walking people through this, and I want to be a part of this. And we had some of the richest conversations I had were in the booths and with videos on, and I loved like the few, I met a couple new Portland booksellers and some others. Like I did actually meet people at Winter Institute this year, which was fantastic and crazy. But I did so in the booths, and and some of the booths fell a little bit more flat. Obviously, like if you're not live, but even some of the presentations, like I can't remember which one had maybe one of the vendors had just like a PowerPoint. Moleskine had a PowerPoint. And I was like, oh yeah, I'll take a look at the PowerPoint and scroll through. So I don't know how much instruction those vendors were given on what they might be able to do in their booth, but I think not too much. Right. And maybe that's because we didn't know, like all of us are new to this, but I love that Macmillan had some education in their booth. That was really interesting. I love that the tech and the advocacy folks were there to hear me and talk about the advocacy issues I wanted to talk about. Like it was really, and maybe it was so great because maybe that was the other thing. Most of the booths I went into had like 4 or 5 people. And I was like, oh, that's kind of surprising. Like, don't people want to learn more about Bookshop? Right? Like, so it was a win. I don't know if it was a win overall. It was definitely a win for those of us who felt like, oh, I want to talk to Bookshop about how I want to do book fairs better. And I'm going to get 15 minutes of Sarah's time to walk me through this, super valuable.
And from the publisher side, they were really great conversations that we were able to have in the booth. And like you said, they did feel there was an intimacy about them that I thought was fantastic because there weren't, 30 people. Usually there weren't 30 people in there all at the same time. So it was good.
All right, let's maybe try to dig into some session takeaways. Does anybody have any specific best practices or anything they plan and implement that they took away from any of the sessions? Any brave soul want to jump in?
I was really surprised by how much I got out of the Brene Brown, and I don't know why I'm surprised. I just was. There were so many nuggets in there, and we had already scheduled to do our marketing and operations team a little bit late this year, but our annual brainstorm, kind of planning the year ahead. And it was funny because last year we had done it at the end of January, and then pretty quickly it all went out the window because the year did not at all turn out how we expected it to. But ironically, when we went back, we found that we had accomplished just about everything that we had wanted to, even in the pandemic times, which was pretty cool.
No, that's very...
The finding your hedgehog thing really just struck a chord with me. And I think right now, when we're all trying to do so many things that we normally don't do, we're going to kind of incorporate that into our brainstorming session on Friday. Just a little bit of work around making sure we all know what our hedgehog is and kind of keeping that front and center with everything that we plan. So
would you mind briefly explaining for the people that didn't attend to that, what is finding your hedgehog? I thought that was great.
Gosh,
also.
Don't put me on the spot. Hold on. Okay, so the hedgehog concept is basically a Venn diagram, and your hedgehog is what's in the middle, and there's the tail of the fox, or the difference between the fox and the hedgehog, and the hedgehog kind of curls up and stays, like basically protects itself. And so what you want to do is you want to find that thing, that center, and protect it in everything you do and in how you approach everything. And so you need to look at the intersection of what you can be the best in the world at. So not what should you be or what are you be, but what can you be? What drives your economic engine? Because obviously, we're not, some of us are nonprofits. I see Jeff is like right below me in the, but most of us are here to make money. And the third is what you're deeply passionate about. So those are kind of the three things, and your hedgehog is what's in the middle, and basically just like the kernel and essence of who you are and what you're trying to achieve as a bookstore.
That's great. Thank you. Sorry for putting you on the spot. That was great.
I got quite a bit out of the, I mean, to be completely honest, the thing that was most meaningful to me was the fact that we were all still here. So many of us are still here. Like, I've really been dreading this Winter Institute and thinking like, who's going to be missing and what stores will have closed. And I think that there was a sigh of relief element and a camaraderie element that was just so important above everything else. So that really was my biggest takeaway. I also was pleasantly surprised. I thought that the Brene Brown one was great. I was really pleasantly surprised with the futurist one as well, and appreciated how they ended up swapping. I think that was serendipitous, and it was the right way to start and the right way to end. And some of the conversations about creating your own future, I thought was wonderful. And I also, having gone to the I guess access, equity, and inclusion, maybe I think was the title, and I've been going to the sessions that have been programmed for years now, and have really found them to be so unhelpful over the years. And this year it felt like the conversation shifted in such a meaningful, substantive way to, first of all, having a professional there, not a bookseller, but also having really good tools about things like oppressive listening and those sorts of things that I just thought were so, it just like hit the spot of where I think most of the audience was and what we kind of needed to hear for next steps, as opposed to, in the past, just trying to convince us that it's important. And studies show that if you recruit a diverse team, then you'll have better results. It's like, we get that. Give us some tools. So I thought that was great as well.
Right. Yeah, that session was fantastic. I could have used another hour of just answering questions after that, but handling bookseller questions and situations for sure.
I will also quickly say one of the things I loved about that session was the chat, and how many booksellers were like, oh, this is uncomfortable. Oh, that's come out of my mouth before. Like, there was so much vulnerability in the chat that I think really enhanced that session. To put in another plug for the chat, doing some work.
Again, that feels like a peer-to-peer sort of theme for one of these chats could certainly evolve around. The other thing that the timing of that one for me gave me, and just the general sort of, I need to acknowledge ABA's really like visible sort of efforts and textual efforts towards acknowledging their position of privilege and or ways in which they are committed to making equity and inclusion a core value in all that they do. And I want to acknowledge that. And I want some of my feedback as somebody who plans events and organization and meetings, right? As we're thinking about planning these types of meetings in Spring Forum, understanding how important and how hard and how, well, not hard, but like layered the role of moderation is, and what the moderator, how active a moderator needs to be in understanding a conversation that can be equitable and inclusive within itself, right? I had one of my booksellers notice that Lauren Groff, am I saying that right? I think was always the final one to chime in to the conversation of novelist as citizen, and it for sometimes natural organic reasons, others in ways that she chose to defer to Viet and Colson, and how that sat with somebody who identifies as female as consistently deferring to those who identify as male. Is interesting, right? Coming off of one and then being on the and the diversity of that panel being beautiful and amazing and complimentary, and just understanding that the role of the moderator could have been to make sure we're having an equitable conversation, and I am making sure I'm directing first sort of answer in an equitable way. It's just interesting to think about as we plan and moderate sessions.
Anybody else? Any takeaways? I feel like it was pretty universally loved, the poetry intermissions. I thought that was fantastic.
I thought Jamie from Women and Children First did a fantastic job on the indie commerce panel. I just want to say that she gave so many practical tips. And I think, you know, this is another example of the plane that we've been building as we've been flying it all year. And the machinery was indie commerce, and like it kept reinventing itself like under us while we were flying the plane. So I actually, from that session, there was a lot of stuff that they had changed or they'd come up with, or, you know, things you could do, like change the wording on the availability of items, that I just like, I hadn't kept up with that. And we really hadn't had time to keep up with that stuff. I came away with a sense generally of being undereducated about all the softwares and technologies that I work with. You know, there were like references in the budgeting thing to like, oh, you can get your Edelweiss report for, you know, what months you spent more money with which publisher, and and that's wonderful. Or, I mean, I guess I can get it out of my POS system too, but I don't really have any idea how. You know, because I experience all of my technology on a like need to know basis. So once something's an emergency, then we figure out how to do it. But I feel like there's just all this unused capacity for things we ought to be doing, especially reporting kinds of things, budget kinds of things, money spending kind of things. And we don't even know how to get these reports out of our software. So, so I think I could definitely use a little more education in those areas, just saying.
I think that's a great point. I attended that session as well. And then also the session, was it the same session with social media? But anyway, it got me to thinking about, it would be great if we had really like deep dives into specific things like that, like monetizing your social media, you know, a whole session just on that aspect of it. I think would be great, things like that. Lauren, I don't know if you have the dates, but there is an indie commerce. I wanted to shout that out at some point, an indie commerce seminar coming up I think in March. Is that right? I don't know if I wrote that down. Middle of March,
yes,
maybe?
It is going to be March. It is March 17th to 18th.
Thank you. Yeah, when I was still at Anderson's, I would attend those when they were in person. And I always found those super valuable. It's usually a deep dive into some aspect of it. I'm not sure exactly what next month's is, but yeah, definitely recommend going to those if you can.
And I would also be curious to, from our side, the indie commerce one-on-one appointments. I know our team thought that they were helpful, but I'd just be curious if anyone here attended an indie commerce one-on-one, if they found it helpful, if the virtual format was okay, and if it was worth the time that you spent. I'd be curious to hear that too.
So we snagged the first appointment of the day, Thursday at 9 a.m. And it was probably some of the most valuable time that we had. We had 3 of us that met with Courtney. And we kind of had submitted some questions ahead of time so she could be prepared. And we, came up with more as we were talking that she didn't necessarily have answers for, but I just noticed before we got on that she had responded to follow up already, which that's pretty impressive. Because it was just Thursday and there was some research that she needed to do for us. So I say yay to that. It was fantastic and we got so much out of it.
I'll second that. And I'll say again that not just for indie commerce, but for me, for Booklog and Bookshop, right? The experience of seeing somebody's face explain something and talk through something with me is not to be underestimated. And I guess I'm going to say this for the publishers too. Like, if you can do your calls on Zoom, if you can take a half hour with us with our faces visible, for me, it was Booklog. I don't know how many of you use Booklog or struggle sometimes to reach somebody who can maybe help you through a problem that you're experiencing real time. And the experience of just talking through some of these frustrations with somebody's face who I could see, who was then telling me, thank you for letting me know. I don't experience it the same way you do. This is how we learn, was so like, thank you. And this is what we get from Winter Institute, but this is what we have to like imagine trying to replicate in our current world. And it's really meaningful. I can't tell you how many times I've called IndieBound and Geeta, who I adore, right, over the phone as much as I do in person, but to have that exchange about how pre-order signed editions have changed so dramatically and how we need to get banners for them because of this fact, right? And how I need to make it more seamless for me was also something like face-to-face that she was like, oh, this makes sense. Yes, let's make this more of a priority rather than, okay, I'm gonna jot an email and hope that this gets in queue, right? And know how overwhelming everything is. So those were really, really valuable. Yeah. And probably my best like nugget takeaways, like this is what we're going to do now with our technology. This is how we're going to run these reports. This is how I'm going to do mail orders better with Booklog. This is how I, like those were just, it was priceless for me in this context. It was like having them there at my store.
Would people say that when ABA has their trainings or their sessions on indie commerce, does there tend to be general, just kind of like e-commerce for booksellers information that's useful there for stores that don't use indie commerce? I never go to those sessions because I don't use indie commerce. No.
That is a good question. I don't think, well, I know that during the Winter Institute panel, they wanted to have more than just indie commerce folks on there. I don't think there's a huge focus on non-indie commerce, but I can get back to you about the upcoming one.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I wouldn't expect there to be, but when you mentioned just like the need to focus on pre-orders, like that's a general thing. So if there tends to be those kinds of general conversations, that's a different thing than if it's nuts and bolts indie commerce type stuff.
So this was my first Winter Institute. I've been to Children's and I've been to Book Expo, but I'd never been to a Winter Institute. And I have to say, I thought it was outstanding. And especially given the constraints that we have right now, I can't imagine in some ways that it could have been better. And I completely agree with, I think it was Jeff who said it was serendipitous to, I mean, almost serendipitous, certainly not for Brene Brown, but to have had the futuristic discussion and her discussion flip-flopped. One of the things that I found particularly, we're a small store, we've got 3 employees, but they're all very committed to being booksellers. And so everybody wanted to attend Winter Institute. And as I think ahead to Winter Institute physically, I'm not sure how as a store I would be able to do that, both obviously financially sending all three of us, and then who would mind the store while we were gone. So I'd like to throw out to the ABA that in future, even though hopefully we will all be able to be physically together, and as an aside, it was so nice to be able to be on those Zoom calls. It felt so much less isolating to see all of the fellow booksellers, exchanging ideas, listening together. The chat was invaluable. Really thrilling to see so many Chicago booksellers names pop up, and Chicago area booksellers and Great Lakes booksellers. But that was kind of fun to see everybody's really interesting questions. But I would just throw out to the ABA, maybe continuing to do some form of the online version of Winter Institute so that everyone can gain benefit from all of the good stuff that was presented. Just a thought. So, and many thanks, because I found it to be tremendously helpful, both in information and in terms of not feeling isolated alone in my little bookstore with my employees. So it was fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you for that, and definitely we're thinking about exactly what you're saying about how to get that digital component, even if we are together again in the future. It's definitely something we're already thinking about, but I'll remind them that it's something that you all do want, so we'll keep thinking about it and figuring out how to do it.
And Lauren, I don't know if you can speak to this yet or if any decisions are made, but if Children's Institute ends up being the in-person being canceled, would the format most likely follow Winter Institute's format this year?
I think that there will be a final decision made very soon about Children's Institute. And regarding format, I don't know. I think we're going to look at the feedback that we get from Winter Institute. And if it does end up needing to be virtual again, then we'll kind of look at the feedback that we got from Winter and kind of go from there in terms of what worked, what didn't work, what we should maybe do differently. But definitely soon there will be some final decisions made for Children's.
I want to go back to Greg's question and just add a comment to that, which I think there might be some oversight based on the strange structure with indie commerce. And I've heard ABA talk about over the years how they were never set up to be a provider of websites and indie commerce, and that's true. And it's been amazing what ABA has been able to do to provide solutions. But because there's been all of that focus, it has left quite a vacuum in e-commerce conversations are unrelated to indie commerce. And I just hope that feedback can roll up, that's missing, and it might not have been as important before as it is now, separate from indie commerce.
Absolutely. Thank you for that feedback, and I will pass that along to the team.
Anybody else? Anyone else want to jump in? So looking through the schedule right now of any sessions we didn't cover.
I fielded questions from reps about whether or not I attended like their evening author receptions, and sadly I didn't because of my schedule and other things, but I am curious, and I know that they are interested in understanding the value of those. Did anybody go to any of those?
I was able to go Saturday night, but not Friday night. And I jumped in a couple of different rooms And I ended up in a room that our event coordinator was moderating because I just wanted to support her and see how it was going. And they were all very different depending on who was moderating them. And I think the more active, to your point, the more active of a moderator there was, the better it seemed to be. A couple of the rooms just really seemed to be stalled out and not going anywhere. And not many people went like on video to be part of the conversation. I think that also made it a little harder and a little less dynamic.
Yeah,
Ruth, you are muted.
sorry. Let me put my camera on too. I think that the moderator issue, like, because I was in one room where the moderator wasn't super active, and it was a little bit awkward, and like there were more booksellers in the chat than came on the screen, and so I mean, obviously I wouldn't want to have to push people to like be in a spot that they don't want to be, but it felt really good to see those people come on the screen, and it was sort of like if no one was coming on, it was like a little awkward. And yeah, I think I'm just repeating myself, but I think the moderator, it should have an active role. Like that should be made a little more clear that that's needed. But the other one was like all of the booksellers were in the chat, and they were just like, I'm loving hearing this conversation. Like, I'm just like, does anybody have any questions? No, because I just love listening to these artists talk to each other. So, I mean, that one was, you know, where it was a graphic novel one was delightful, where it went over, and there was like several booksellers who were just, you know, obviously dedicated to the form and to these artists. But I think attendance could have been better too.
It was a hard, it seemed to me to be a hard thing to replicate, because part of the joy of that is the one-on-one experience with the author when you're in those lines and meeting them and sort of connecting with them personally. And so I think you're right, Ruth, that it didn't seem like the parameters were set, like, should I be on screen? Should I not be on screen? So I think part of that might have been just a learning curve of using the medium.
Yeah. And
definitely
the getting someone into the room, there was a few times where I was like trying to get someone into the room, and I wasn't sure if I had lost them or if they had clicked off, or like that was, I mean, a learning curve thing, I guess, too.
Yeah. Yeah, but it definitely, I mean, I hear you, what you say about the moderators, because some were, it was awkward, and then some were just phenomenal. So mostly more phenomenal than awkward. So hopefully that was.
I agree that the moderators were a huge part of those, but I think one of the things that I saw contributing to the awkwardness was there being two bookseller moderators in those rooms, because between the two of them, they often didn't know who was doing what. And so with four authors, maybe you just needed one bookseller to moderate that. And for the rooms that I was in, at least, the having to like choose to be on screen or not thing just wasn't good. It didn't work. There were like one or two people that were on, and when I got in, I was like, is that an author? Who is that person? Do I need to know who that is? Do I need to be on screen? So it just kind of, it didn't seem to contribute, and it made some sort of like, you know, some of the people in a room having to have a conversation shit that I like not having to deal with online. It sort of almost recreated that. So I would argue against having this optional thing in that particular kind of session of the bookseller participants having to choose whether to be on screen or not. Personally.
I still think like part of it is we're all volunteers, right? And I want to like acknowledge how hard it can be to like build panels and find appropriate speakers, and everybody has a different personality and will moderate in a different way, obviously. But I still think that as an organization, as a regional and as a national organization, we can provide better guidelines to moderators, even in a most basic way, to ensure the timeliness of the movement of the conversation, the relevancy of the conversation, knowledge that panelists may veer off topic and want to tell a story, and that's okay sometimes. And it also is the moderator's job to keep the conversation focused on the educational topic that everybody is there to learn about. I know that's something consistently that I get feedback from education, veering off topic, right? And not providing substance on the topic that was hoped for. And that's something that as human beings, we all naturally do, but that the moderator really is responsible for reeling that in and making sure they redirect to the topic. Yeah, I think if there was one session where that happened, well, the processing online orders felt like something where several of my booksellers were going to take away 20 new ideas or strategies for how to be more efficient with our online orders. And I think we maybe took away 2, and we heard some great stories and interesting ideas, and it was enriching. It didn't stay on the topic in a really, considering how like important the topic is and how many different ways we may be doing this and how many different ideas we may have executed to make sure our online orders are getting processed well. But that's more like in Larry and for GLIBA, like what do we do? How do we do that? How do we empower moderators? How do we empower panelists? And how much work does need to go into that? Or is that just too much work?
No, it's got me thinking about some things. I think there's definitely room for us to hold some kind of education, because it could also coincide with like how to be a better event host, author event host. You know, it doesn't have to strictly be to pertain to, you know, hosting education for your regional or on a national level. I think those kind of skills and skill sets would pertain to anybody. I think it's definitely, and I think, you know, when we start planning for Heartland again, I think, you know, if we're able to set up a session a day early where all the moderators can meet and get together and have like a little powwow and set expectations and guidelines, I think that would be great. And definitely, you know, something we can make happen. That's one other thing I wanted to mention about the moderators. Yeah. So speaking from my experience, that's something that's very hard to do, is get a good moderator in the right spot. It's way more art than science at the moment, for me at least. And a big part of it is knowing booksellers and knowing, you know, them as people and putting them in the right situation. But I think if we were able to put together some kind of formal education, we could really kind of level the you know, our educational playing field, if you will. We have just a few minutes left. Johanna, do you want to talk about our plans for March?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I do. We were all on the board very inspired by the Brene Brown idea of having a book club. So I think we are going to start a GLIBA book club going forward. So one month, what am I trying to say? One chat a month we will dedicate to a book that we will all have read collectively, and then talk about it. And if it works, it works. And if it doesn't, we'll move on to another idea. But so I think we're going to start with Brene Brown's Daring to Lead. There's a lot of material around that. And I think given that we will have the chat still up for the next couple weeks, you said, Lauren, the keynote that she gave.
Yes, Brené's keynote is posted now, and it'll be for another month, and then we have to take it down. But you can watch it now.
Great. So we'll try and roll that into to our inaugural book club session. So we'll send out more details about that, but hopefully you will join us. And if you have booksellers that you want to join us, they should come as well.
Thank you, Joanna. Yeah, we'll have more info after next Wednesday's for next Wednesday's book talk, and it will be the last Wednesday of March. Will be this book club, which is March 31st, Wednesday, March 31st, same time as our book chat. Cool. Just a couple minutes left. Anybody else? Anything they want to?
I have a quick
Sure.
question from the chat. Someone mentions, or a couple of people mentioned, I'm curious, Lauren, the Saturday scheduling, what was the thinking behind having it run into a weekend? If you know.
That is a great question. It was so long ago that they decided that. I don't know. I don't know. I'm sure there was a lot that went into that decision. Was there feedback that it was harder for people to attend on the Saturday? Would you prefer it to be just during the week?
There were 2 comments in the chat to that effect I was referring to. And I'm mostly curious. Clearly, it was a deliberate decision. Just curious what the factors were.
I think part of it that I heard anecdotally was that it was a deliberate decision so that it would straddle both a work week and a weekend, so that it would give different people with different schedules an opportunity to join.
And I would have to assume by work week, because Johanna, you're speaking to booksellers whose Saturdays are their most important day of the week.
Oh, no, I know it.
So, right. So work week for us, for many of my,
I'm sorry, I used the wrong language.
No.
The traditional
I'm just saying, like,
40-hour work
week is a
week.
work week for authors and possibly the publishers for sure. Right. Like that should be honored. And maybe that was the straddle that was honored, and still Saturdays for a bookseller. And I will say, yeah, only 2 of us could attend on Saturday because of that fact. We have to process more orders. We have to see more customers. We have to run more sales on a Saturday than any other day of the week. So if we are planning a bookseller forum, Saturday is usually a day to stay away from that vantage.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Good point.
All right, closing in on 2. Any farewell thoughts? No. It's good to see everybody.
A question,
Oh,
Larry, if I could just ask one quick question to get maybe a little bit more feedback on. So I've heard that you wanted to maybe have more opportunity for discussion after some of the education sessions. But the bookseller to bookseller discussion groups that we tried to do over Zoom weren't very well attended. So if anyone has some feedback on that, if it was the timing, I know it was in the evening, if it was because you had to change from Hopin to Zoom, if anyone has feedback on that, if there was a way we could have made it better for you to attend, I'd be happy to hear.
One suggestion that we're talking about for Heartland is something kind of like this. So it would be, the event would be promoted as one single event, a 2-hour event, where the first half is a presentation or panelist or something, and then the second hour is just a bookseller breakout. But it's sold as one single event. So I don't know if that would help attendance, but I think if you go into it knowing that you're going to participate in something for 2 hours, that might be more helpful, or half hour, however you break it up.
Can I talk on that one? The issue that I had was I and a couple others were in the waiting room to go to the bookseller, and we didn't get we were in there on time, and we didn't get put into our group until 18 minutes into the talk. And then the moderator, once we got in there, was upset with us because she felt that we were all just coming in late on our own. And so we missed 18 minutes of the discussion. So it was, we had a lot of people, almost everybody in my group had their, we're up on Zoom, we could see them, but it just messed up the entire discussion format.
Yes, the technology didn't really work as we had planned it to, so it took a lot longer than we expected to get everyone into the breakout groups. So that definitely didn't work as we would have hoped.
And I'm surprised to hear that your evaluation is low attendance, because my impression was we actually, even after we broke out, had way too many people, so that two people basically set the agenda, which also, as Larry's saying, like, we didn't know what the agenda was. We just sort of got to like be at the whim of somebody who had a question that was relevant to that person, and also then set the next 10 minutes of the conversation. So it wasn't like we were all there talking. We knew what we were going to be talking about. We knew what we could ask questions about, and we could stay focused. So I would say, right, like I envision them to be more like round tables, like the number of people who would fit around a round table, like 12 maybe at the most, or 15. And you're talking about equity and inclusion in hiring practices, equity inclusion in customer service. You have a focused topic that each of you know you're coming to that with, and that invests you or keeps you in the right, ready for the conversation.
So smaller groups.
All right, well, thank you, everybody. Same time next Wednesday. It's good to see y'all. Bye.
Bye, everyone.